بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The first hadith which we are going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, narrated by Sayyidah Aisha radhiyallahu anha, and she says, "Khayyarana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam," that the Prophet of Allah, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave us all a choice. Khayyarana means that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave us all a choice, gave us all, i.e. the wives, the azwaj mutahharat, a choice, ultimatum. The hadith then goes on to say, فَاخْتَرْنَا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, and we all chose Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now this hadith which I mentioned, we're going to look at it from two aspects or from two angles. Firstly, I'm going to mention what does this hadith mean. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam giving the wives, giving the azwaj mutahharat a choice. And thereafter we are going to look at the ruling or the mas'ala which can be derived from this particular hadith. Now before we look at the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave his wives the choice or an ikhtiyar or an ultimatum, we're firstly going to look at or glance at a Quranic verse, because the incident or the story from this particular hadith is linked with this particular ayat and verse which can be found in Surah Al-Ahzab. Now in verse 28 Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nabi, O nabi, O prophet, Kulli azwajika, say to your wives, in kuntunna turidna al-hayata dunya wa zinataha, that if they want the beauty, if they want the blink, if they want the adornment of this world, fata'alayna umatti'kunna wa usarrihkunna sarahan jamila, then order them that you, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is willing to divorce them in a good way and divorce them and let them go so that they can then go after and chase the dunya and chase the world. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَإِن كُنْتُنَّ تُرِدْنَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالدَّارُ الْآخِرَةِ, that if the wives want Allah and His Rasul, وَالدَّارُ الْآخِرَةِ, and if they want the hereafter, then tell them فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَدَّ لِلْمُحْسِنَاتِ مِنْ كُنَّ أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared for the muhsinat, i.e. for those women who do good, ajran azima, a great reward and a great ajr. Now let me explain why this hadith or why this particular verse came about. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabas, when they migrated from Makkah to Medina Munawwara, initially the Muslim financially were not very strong. And when you look at, say for example, Fazail A'mal, you read many stories of the Sahabas going through poverty, going through faqr, going through real hardship. Many days Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go without food. A very good example of the social boycott of the Muslims which happened before Hijrah and migration, where the Muslims, they were just surviving on leaves and they were surviving on shredded camel skin. So this is what they were surviving on for many years. They lived a life of hunger and poverty. Now later on, during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's prophethood and mission, there were many battles where the Muslims were victorious and they received a large amount of booty and mal ghanimat. Say for example the battle of Hunayn, the battle of Tabuk. So what happened was that the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they then come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they say to him, that, O Prophet of Allah, O Messenger of Allah, Look at the wives of Persia. Look at the wives of Rome. Look at them. They live in beautiful palaces. They live in beautiful mansions. They wear the most expensive clothing. They have the beautiful necklaces, the adornment, the bracelets and earrings and so on. Why do we, these were the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying that why do we have to live in a mud house? Why do we have to live in a house made out of soil and mud? Why do we have to wear ripped clothing and tattered clothing? And they were asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we want an increase in nafqah, that we want more pocket money. We want you to give us more money so that we can spend lavishly, so that we can live a life similar to that the wives of Persia and Rome. Obviously, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard this, he was very, very upset. He was very, very displeased. And why was he upset and not pleased? Is because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that success in this world and in the hereafter did not lie in how much money you have in your pocket. It did not lie in how much money you have in your bank. It does not lie in how big your houses are, or how much land you have, or how many animals you have, or how many children you have. Success lies in taqwa, piety, being God-fearing. Because someone who is God-fearing, someone who does good actions, someone who does good deeds, then they will be successful in this world and they will be successful in the hereafter. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard the wives complaining that, Rasulullah, give us more money, give us more nafqah so that we can spend, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very, very upset. That was one reason. And another reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was upset, because the wives, his wives, they are the ummahatul mu'mineen. They are the spiritual mothers of this ummah. So therefore, for them to ask for money and nafqah, for them to ask for a lavish lifestyle, was something which was against their taqwa, against their piety, and against their maqam and their status. And this is similar to a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, the khitab was given to the Sahabas and the companions, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the Sahabas and companions that if you leave out 1/10 of the Sharia, halakha, you will be destroyed. However, a time will come when if the people were to act upon 1/10 of the Sharia, najah, they will be saved. Now, what does this hadith mean? That if the Sahabas were to leave out 1/10, they will be destroyed, the Sharia, the deen will be destroyed. But a time will come, i.e. just before Day of Judgment, where if people were to just act upon the fara'is, 1/10 of the deen and the Sharia, they would be saved. Now, what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meant was that the Sahabas, they are the leaders. They are supposed to be the imam of the community. They are the leaders of the next generation. Now, if the Sahabas are a bit laxed when it comes to following the Quran, when it comes to following the Hadith and the Sunnah, then what do you then expect of the next generation? It's like, say, for example, if you want to use a modern day example, if, say, the imam of the community, if the leader of the community, the imam, if he's not praying his namaz properly, if he's not acting upon the sunnah properly, what do you then expect the people to do? Do you then expect the people to be better than the imam? When the imam, the guide of the community, if he's not God-fearing himself, if he's not acting upon the sunnah, if he's not, say, wearing a turban, if he's not doing the miswak regularly, if he doesn't have a beard, then what do you then expect the people to do? Do you then expect the people to start then wearing turbans and doing miswak and keeping a fistful beard? It'll be very, very rare. So that's what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said from this hadith, that if you were to leave out a bit of the deen or the Sharia, then the deen afterwards would then become halakha, or you will then become destroyed. Exactly same point Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was trying to make to his wife, that look, if you were to ask for nafqah and maintenance and a lavish lifestyle, then the wives who would then come afterwards, in the next generation, in the Tabi'in's generation, the Tabi'in's generation, or 1400s later, they will be asking for increased nafqah and living a lavish lifestyle. So therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was upset from two accounts. Number one was because taqwa didn't lie on wealth and asking for a lavish lifestyle, and number two, it was against the maqam and the status of the azwaj mutahharat to ask for a lavish lifestyle, to ask for an increase in nafqa and maintenance. And because of that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then revealed this verse, and he told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, give your wives an ultimatum, give your wives a choice. If they want dunya, then tell them, I'll give you divorce, I'll give you talaq. Then you could then get married to someone else, and then you could go for the dunya. You could then have that lavish lifestyle. However, if they want Allah and His Rasul wa dar al-akhirah and in the hereafter, then tell them that they have to abide by the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and by the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this then takes us on to the hadith here, where Hazrat Aisha then narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam gave us all a choice. So it's mentioned in the hadith that when this verse was revealed, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called each and every single one of his wife, and he said to them that Allah has revealed a verse about you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving all of you an ultimatum, a choice. Either take this path, the path of dunya, and then me and I, you and I, there's no connection. Or if you want to be with me, if you want to be my wife in this dunya and the hereafter, then you need to basically back down on all your demands, and you're asking for an increased nafqa and maintenance. So the hadith, even though it's not mentioned in this hadith, but it's mentioned in the hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, that the first wife Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called was Hazrat Aisha anha. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam firstly said to Aisha anha that I'm giving you a choice, but you don't have to make a decision now. Do mashwara with your parents, do mashwara with Abu Bakr anhu, and then come back to me. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited the verse to Hazrat Aisha anha. Then Hazrat Aisha anha then replied to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, O Prophet of Allah, is this something which I need to do mashwara with my parents for? Is it something which I need to ask my parents? Obviously, nakhtarullah wa rasula, or akhtarullah wa rasula, I am going to choose Allah and His Rasul. So it's mentioned that all the wives then chose Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and obviously none of them were divorced by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is the historical aspect of this particular hadith. And let me derive the masla from this particular hadith. Now, as the brothers who have been attending the last few weeks will know that the topic which we are looking at is regarding talaq and divorce. And this is like another form of divorce. Generally speaking, it's the right of a man and a husband to divorce his wife. But there are certain situations where the wife can actually initiate a divorce through a khula, which we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, or by taking her case to an Islamic Sharia council. But generally speaking, it's the right of the husband to initiate or to give his wife a talaq and a divorce. Now, as with all rights and haqq, if the person wants, the sahib haqq, whoever's right he is, he can always delegate this right to someone else. So just say, for example, I'll give you an example. It's mentioned in the books of fiqh that the set imam or the local imam of the masjid, it's his right to lead the prayer. Even though there may be someone pious or a shaykhul hadith or a mufti or a qari behind him, it doesn't matter. Whoever is the set imam for that masjid, it's his haqq, it's his right to lead the prayer. However, if the imam, it's his haqq, but if the imam says to the shaykhul hadith, or shaykhul hadith sahab, can you lead the prayer, then he's allowed to delegate or pass this haqq and right to someone else to lead the prayer. So exactly here, when it comes to this particular hadith, that it is the right of a husband to give his wife talaq and divorce. However, if the husband wants, he can actually delegate this right to his wife. And he could say to his wife that you can give yourself divorce and talaq. That I have given you permission that you can give yourself talaq. That you can choose yourself or you can give yourself talaq. So that is the masla which the scholars have derived from this particular hadith, which in the books of fiqh is known as taqyirut talaq. Giving the option and the choice of talaq li'imra'atihi to one's wife. So a scenario could be like the husband, or what's mentioned in the books of fiqh, the husband, he could say to his wife that ikhtari nafsaki, choose yourself. Now choose yourself here means that you've now got a choice of either choosing yourself, or you could stay in my nikah and choose the husband. Now, if the wife responds and replies by saying, Akhtaru nafsi, that I have chosen myself, then what would happen? One irrevocable divorce, one talaq ba'in will occur on the spot, which will basically means that the nikah will break straight away. So that is the ruling or the mas'ala which the jurists and the fuqaha have derived from this particular hadith. The second hadith which we're going to look at is a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, narrated by Ibn Abbas anhu, who says, قَالَ فِي الْحَرَامِ يُكَفِّرُ, that when somebody makes halal things haram upon himself, he should give kafara and he should give an expiation. And then he goes on to say, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, and we have a beautiful example and a beautiful practical example in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now let me explain this particular hadith, and in particular the story Ibn Abbas anhu was referring to. Now Hazrat Ibn Abbas anhu from this hadith, fil harami yukaffir, is referring to an incident during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made honey haram upon himself. You probably may have heard this story before, that honey is something which is halal and lawful, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made it haram upon himself. So the verse was revealed, Ya ayyuhan nabi, lima tuharrimu ma ahallallahu lak. That why are you making something haram, i.e. the honey, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it halal and lawful for you. Now let me explain the hadith and the story behind it. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, every day he would go to Hazrat Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha's house, and he would drink, or she would make a honey drink for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would drink this honey at Hazrat Zainab bint Jahsh radhiyallahu anha's house. And the reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would always go to her house in particular for this honey drink is because, as mentioned in another hadith of Sunan Tirmidhi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved and liked sweet things. That's why it's mentioned one of the adabs and the etiquettes of Eid al-Fitr, not for Eid al-Adha but for Eid al-Fitr, that when you wake up, before you make your way towards the masjid or the Eidgah, you should eat something sweet. And the same also guidance Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave, that when a newborn child is born, then you should do tahniq of the child, which is to get a bit of dates or kajur, rip a bit of the kajur and then put it into the mouth of the baby and let it dissolve in its mouth and in its saliva. So tahniq, or something sweet, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved and liked. So similarly, like a honey drink, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved that. Now what happened was that the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they saw that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was spending too much time with Zainab radhiyallahu anha, and like it does when a husband has many wives, it kind of develops some kind of envy and some kind of jealousy amongst the wives. So the wives got together, in particular Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha and Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha, and they said to amongst themselves, like, let's devise a plan where we will stop Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam drinking honey at Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha's house. And the plan they came up with was that if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he comes to us after visiting Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha's house, we will say to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you have eaten maghafir, that you haven't drank honey, but you have eaten maghafir. Now what is maghafir? Maghafir is a name of a shrub which has a very foul and an unpleasant smell. So it's a name of a tree which has got like a very foul smell. Now as you know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he disliked foul smell, bad odor. That's why it's mentioned in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari that if somebody has eaten onions and garlic, he should not come to the masjid. Why? Because not only are you annoying the the brothers who are next to you, you are also annoying the angels and the malaika. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that make sure you either rinse your mouth before you come to the masjid, or if you are going to eat garlic or onion, then make sure it's matbukh. Matbukh meaning make sure that it's cooked. If it's just like raw onions or raw garlic, you shouldn't eat it and come to the masjid. And from there the scholars have mentioned that any other kind of vegetables or any other kind of fruit or any other kind of food which gives a foul smell out or a very, very strong smell, like certain curries and salan, then you shouldn't just eat it and then just come to the masjid with that smell. Why? Because you're just going to be annoying people. Sometimes it happens that people, they come from a chip shop and they stand next to you and you could smell the oil from their clothes, and so really like it kind of annoys you because you want to concentrate in the salah, but then you get this kind of vapor of fish and chips coming and so on. So it kind of annoys you in your salah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given us the hidayat and the guidance. He said that make sure that you clean yourself, rinse yourself before you come. So as I was saying that the wives, they were planning that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes near us, we will say to him that you have et maghafir. Now exactly what happened, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha. And Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, akalta al-maghafir, that you have just eaten maghafir. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied by saying, La bal sharibtu aslan, that I have drank honey. I haven't ate maghafir, I've actually drank honey with at Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha's house. Then Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha replied and responded by saying, it could have happened, or perhaps the honeybee may have sat on the maghafir shrub and ate its nectar and then went and then made the honey. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard this from Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha, she's accusing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you smell of maghafir and your smell and your odor isn't pleasant. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then made honey haram upon himself. He said that I'm not going to drink honey anymore at Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha's house. But more importantly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said to Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha that don't tell anyone. Don't tell any of the wives, and in particular don't tell Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha. Why? Because if Hazrat Zainab radhiyallahu anha finds out, she will become upset, she will become naraz, she will become a bit angry and a bit displeased. But unfortunately what happened was Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha, she then told Hazrat Aisha radhiyallahu anha. And that's why the verse afterwards reveals that فَلَمَّا نَبَّأَهَا بِهِ قَالَتْ مَنْ أَنْبَأَكَ هَذَا, and فَلَمَّا نَبَّأَتْ بِهِ وَأَظْهَرَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ أَرَّفَ بَعْدَهُ وَأَعْرَضَ عَنْ بَعْدٍ, where the verse was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that some of the wives, i.e. Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha, disclosed this secret to somebody else without your permission. So it's mentioned in another hadith of Sunan al-Tirmidhi that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very, very angry with Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha, that he was ready to give her a talaq and a divorce. Then there's two opinions. One opinion goes on to say that Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu then asked for intercession, sifarish to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, please don't divorce my daughter, because remember Hafsa radhiyallahu anha was the daughter of Umar radhiyallahu anhu. So that's one opinion. And the second opinion goes on to say that Hazrat Jibreel alayhi salam came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not to divorce Hazrat Hafsa radhiyallahu anha. Why? Because she, i.e. Hafsa radhiyallahu anha, remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot and prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot, and also does a lot of qiyamul layl, i.e. she stands in worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because of these ibadat and these kind of actions, then Jibreel alayhi salam told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not to give her talaq, not to give her divorce, and forgive her of her shortcoming and forgive her of her mistakes. So this is what this particular hadith and this particular incident is referring to, that if somebody does make something halal haram upon himself, then what he should do is that he should give kafara. And this is with, remember, all things. It doesn't have to be with honey, but just say, for example, something which is halal to consume, like biscuits or like tea. So if somebody makes that haram upon himself, the order from the Sharia is that he should straight away give kafara. Okay, the Sharia doesn't say that now from now all the way until the rest of your life, abstain from drinking tea or abstain from eating biscuits or something like that. Because remember, this is something which is halal. You should not make halal things haram upon yourself. And if you have made it haram upon yourself, then what you should do straight away is give kafara, or expiation. Because remember, when you make something haram, it is though that you have made an oath. So you should give a kafara and an expiation straight away, and then afterwards start resuming using that particular thing. And what is the kafara anyway? The kafara, as mentioned in the Quran, is that you should try to feed 10 miskeens, and if you can't, then the last option is فَصِيَامُ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ, i.e. fast for 3 days consecutively. In the Hanafi fiqh is that you should fast 3 days but together consecutively, so that your kafara and your expiation would be done. The next hadith, the third hadith which we're going to look at, is a hadith which can be found in Sharh al-Sunnah, narrated by Sayyiduna Ali radiallahu anhu. Now the words of the hadith are, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, La talaqa qabla nikahi, that there is no talaq without nikah or without marriage. Meaning that a husband or a man can only give talaq if he is married. If somebody isn't married, then he can't just go outside and he finds a woman and says to her, I've given you talaq. Probably get a slap across the face or something like that. But basically what I'm trying to say is that you have to be married for you to give talaq. If you're not married, if you don't have a woman in your nikah or your marriage, then you can't give talaq. So that's the first part of the hadith, La talaqa qabla nikah. You have to be married to give talaq. If you are not married, then you can't give talaq. So that's the first rule. The second part of the hadith and the second rule, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, وَلَا عِتَاقَ إِلَّا بَعْدَ مِلْكٍ, which means that you can only free a slave or a gulam if that slave or gulam is in your possession. Now slavery, raqiyat, is something which we may touch on later on. So basically, if somebody can only free a slave if that slave is in his possession. If that slave belongs to someone else, then you can't go and free that particular slave. And that same rule also applies when it comes to buying and selling. Now just say for example, if this book belongs to Abdul Rahman, then I can't just go and start selling Abdul Rahman's possession or Abdul Rahman's book, or a mobile phone which belongs to Zayd. So I can't go out and start selling Zayd's mobile phone without his possession or without his permission. So the second part of the hadith here is wala itaqa illa ba'da milkin, that there is no slave, there is no freeing except freeing a slave unless that slave is in your possession. Then the third part of the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then goes on to say wala wisala fi siyami, that there is no sawm wisal. There is no such thing as continuously fasting. Now there are two types of hadiths, or there are two types of fasting. Again, we'll probably look at when we look at the fasting section. One is called sawm dahr, and the other one is called sawm wisal. And the difference between them two is sawm dahr is fasting every single day, but you're doing iftar at sunset. So at sunset, you're still doing iftar, but then the next day you wake up for sahri, and then you fast, and then at sunset, you then do iftar. Sawm wisal, on the other hand, is basically continuously fasting without iftar in the middle. So it's like 24 hours, 7 days a week, you're just fasting. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, there is no such thing as sawm wisal, or continuously fasting Islam. You can't continuously fast for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, 94 hours, 96 hours, you can't continuously fast. There has to be an iftar or a break in the middle. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Wala wisala fi siyamin." There is no sawm wisal. And the main reason why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said this is because the whole purpose of fasting is to control your desires and your nafs. But if somebody every single day he is fasting without iftar in the middle, then what happens is that he gets into a habit. So it then becomes like his normal routine. And then when something becomes your normal routine, you can't then affect the nafs and the soul and your desires. Just say for example, if somebody's routine is like, for example, he doesn't eat from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just say it's his routine. Then what happens is that when it becomes your routine, you can't then curb your desires, you can't then curb your nafs and your ruh. So that's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that don't fast continuously, because if you do, you then get used to it, it becomes your routine, it becomes your habit, it becomes your ada, and when it happens, then the whole purpose or wisdom of fasting would not be achieved. The next thing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam goes on to say, وَلَا يُتْمَ بَعْدَ إِحْتِلَامٍ. After you reach the age of puberty, you're not considered to be a yatim anymore. Now, who is a yatim? Yatim is someone whose father has passed away. You call that child a yatim. But remember, he only remains a yatim until he reaches the age of puberty. After he reaches the age of puberty, he's not a yatim anymore. Okay, so just say for example, a child who's 5 years old, 6 years old, his father passes away, so he's a yatim. But then when this child reaches the age of puberty, 12, 13, or when he's grown up, 25, 30-year-old and so on, then you don't call that grown man a yatim anymore, because in that case then many of our elder people in our community, 50, 60, whose father passed away, you start calling them yatim as well. So remember, the ruling of yatim lasts until the age of puberty. Afterwards, he's not a yatim anymore. And the next part of the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, there is no fosterage after the milk drinking period finishes. Ba'da fitam. Again, we read this hadith, we read the topic about fosterage before rada'at. So I mentioned, according to Imam Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi, fosterage is only established up to 30 months. Meaning that up to 2.5 years, if a child drinks the milk of a mother, then obviously there's that kind of lineage and rada'at and fosterage established between that child and that particular woman. But after 2.5 years, if a child, a 3-year-old child, a 3.5-year-old child drinks the milk of a woman, then there is no fosterage established there, meaning that that woman would not become haram and unlawful for this child. That woman would not be considered to be the foster mother of this child. Again, we looked at this in detail before. And the last part of the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Wala somta yawmin ila al-layl," that there is no such thing as being silent for a day, i.e. there is no such thing in Islam, there is no such ibadat or worship of being silent for a day, ila al-layl, until night. Now what this particular hadith is referring to, it's referring to that during the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, during the time of Sayyidah Maryam radhiyallahu anha, it was considered ibadat and worship to be quiet. Everybody knows the story of Sayyidah Maryam radhiyallahu anha. So when she gave birth to Isa alayhi salam, so she was worried that what people are going to say to her, that she's given birth to a child without the connection of a father. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Sayyidah Maryam radhiyallahu anha that if anybody asks, say to them, Inni nadhartu lirrahmani sawman falan ukallima al-yawma insiya. That I've made a vow that I am not going to speak to anyone today. So in the Sharia of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, it was considered ibadat and worship not to speak to anyone. Just say for example, you make a vow that today you're not going to speak to anyone. That was considered to be an ibadat and a worship. But in the Sharia of Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's not considered to be worship. It has been abrogated, it's been mansukh, and there's no such thing as being quiet and being silent and thinking that to be worship. And this is something which is very, very important, because unfortunately what happens when people go into itikaf during Ramadan, the last 10 days of Ramadan, they think that because we are in itikaf, we can't speak to anyone. So what happens for the 10 days? They don't speak to anyone. They don't actually literally, they don't speak to anyone. Even like people ask them anything, they just like gesture, they do ishara with their fingers, and they think that they're doing some kind of ibadah. Remember, when you're in itikaf and you're in the masjid, you can talk, but talk about deeni things, about religious things, not about worldly things, not about football. Obviously, that's understandable. You shouldn't be talking about that in the masjid, but you can talk about deeni things in the masjid. So people who are in itikaf, they think that because we're in itikaf, we can't talk, we can't speak. So that there's no such thing, there's no such basis, there's no such thing like that in the Sharia. There was prevalent in the previous Sharia, but by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's bi'sat and prophethood, such a ruling has been abrogated. So basically, the conclusion is that in the previous Sharia, it was considered allowed and accepted that you can remain quiet for a day. It was considered to be ibadah and worship, but there's no such thing like that in the Sharia of Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to act on what's been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.